On a pleasant spring day toward the end of May in 1859, a stranger rode into town. He came on a canvas-covered wagon, wearing a linen duster and sporting a flowing white beard. It really made him look much older than he really was. Who was this tall stranger knocking at the door of Mary Ritner's boarding house on King Street? And what did he want in Chambersburg? To answer these questions, we need go back to the year 1800. In that year, John Brown was born at Torrington, Connecticut, and he lived there until after he had passed 5 summers. Then the family moved to Hudson, Ohio. He came from hardy Puritan stock, whose ancestors arrived on the Mayflower in 1620. Spending time with the Indians, he learned to dress animal skins and appreciate small treasures. By the time he was 12, he drove cattle by himself for hundreds of miles.
Oh, get right on stay.
Around that time, an event happened which caused him to swear eternal war on slavery. He once stayed with a U.S. Marshal who held a slave boy. The boy was poorly clothed and badly fed and lodged in cold weather. He was beaten before Brown's eyes with iron shovels or anything that came to hand. From that moment on, he began to reflect on the wretched condition of slaves with no one to protect them, not even the law. A religious man, raised in the belief of the Puritan ideal, which is self-sacrifice for a greater cause, he brought up his children to live this philosophy in their daily lives. The law of God was their constant study. As an adult, John Brown worked for freeing the slaves in Ohio. After the murder in 1837 of Elijah Lovejoy, the abolitionist publisher, he conceived the idea of becoming liberator of the Southern slaves. In the 1840s, he moved his family to the New England, New York area, ostensibly to start a new business venture. There he met with many abolitionists, including philanthropist Gerrit Smith, who had offered land to colored settlers in the Adirondacks at North Elba, New York, in a harmonic interracial community. Brown offered to settle there and help the Negroes, a proposition which Smith readily accepted. It was probably during this time period that Brown first planned to lead a slave insurrection. By the 1850s, political turmoil in the Kansas Territory over slavery caused Brown and his sons to become involved as part of the New England Emigrant Aid Company. Brown arrived in October 1855. Anarchy ruled between the slaveholders moving in from Missouri and the anti-slavery men and women moving in from New England. The territory was becoming known as Bleeding Kansas because of the pro-slavery forays in which many people were killed. Brown was convinced it was time for the abolitionists to defend themselves by force. His men attacked and murdered pro-slavery settlers during the summer of 1856, and at that point, Captain John Brown became a marked man of national notoriety. Brown soon left for Boston to meet with the Secret Six. These were wealthy abolitionist men who would fund his holy war. He spent the next 3 years raising money and assembling a convention to organize the Friends of Freedom, which favored revolution in order to create equality for the black race. John Brown hoped to overthrow the existing government of the United States by creating an uprising at the Harper's Ferry, Virginia arsenal. He recruited both blacks and whites, good men, industrious men, who act only from the dictates of conscience, men who fear God too much to fear anything human. At the same time, he worked on a plan to find a place to consolidate his weapons, rifles, pistols, pikes,
I'm in trouble.
In 1858, Brown sent his son, John Jr., to scout the towns of southern Pennsylvania. Chambersburg appeared to be the best location because it was at the end of the Cumberland Valley Railroad, and those weapons could be taken off the railroad cars there and stored in the adjacent warehouse. Later, they would be taken by wagon south to the Kennedy farm that Brown had rented in Maryland. Then again, it may not have been hard to find sympathetic people to the cause here in Franklin County. This house on King Street was known to be the home of Abraham Ritner's widow, daughter-in-law of the abolitionist Pennsylvania governor, Joseph Ritner. And Abraham Ritner was thought to have been a conductor on the Underground Railroad, as well as a conductor on the Cumberland Valley Railroad. Supposedly, Mary continued the practice of hiding runaway slaves and helping them move north on the railroad. And here was this boarding house just a few steps away from the railroad, the perfect solution for Brown's plans. When he arrived in Chambersburg in late spring of 1859, Brown used the name Isaac Smith, since there was a price on his head. During the next 5 months, several white men of his provisional army stayed at the boarding house, including John Henry Kagi, his Secretary of War, who was boarding at the house under the assumed name of John Henry. Black followers, including Frederick Douglass, the famous African-American abolitionist and journalist, stayed with Henry Watson, a local black barber and a captain on the Underground Railroad. Around the middle of August, at the request of Brown, Frederick Douglass visited Chambersburg for the purpose of bringing additional funding from the North. Douglass, who was recognized immediately after stepping off the railroad car, was asked to speak at the local town hall. All day Saturday and part of Sunday, Brown and Douglass met secretly at an old stone quarry near the Conacajig Creek, with Kagi and Shields Green, an associate of Douglass. Brown wanted Douglass to help support the attack on Harper's Ferry, but Douglass refused. He left the next day for Harrisburg, advising Brown to be patient, work slowly, gathering the slaves toward the mountains. Brown was in and out of the area for the next few months and kept constant counsel with John Henry, his trusted Secretary of War. He continued his plans and set the date of October 16th for the raid on the federal arsenal. With only 21 men, he captured the arsenal that night, only to lose it by morning to the U.S. Marines. Arrested and charged with treason, Brown was hanged on December 2nd in Charlestown, Virginia.
I am Mrs. Abraham Ritner, and my home was known to be part of the Underground Railroad activities in this county when my husband was living. After a short illness, he died in 1851, and I needed to support my children. There were 7 of them. 4 of the children were from my husband's previous marriage, but Susanna died at an early age and is buried in the old Methodist graveyard next to her father. We had 3 more children, all girls, Laura, Emma, and Ella. I opened this boarding house the year after my husband died. I have had such special people help me. Mr. Franklin Kagi has been boarding here for some time and worked on the additions to the house in the back. Then, Mr. John Henry came to stay in the early spring. He told me to expect another boarder soon, a Mr. Smith. Come with me now, and let me tell you what happened here in the summer of '59 after Mr. Smith knocked on my door.